Options, and that will be presented today by Amanda Stock with People's Memorial, which is also the organization I work with. We're going to go ahead and turn it over real quick to Nancy Sloat, who's here from the Seattle Public Libraries, to do a little intro for herself. Nancy?
Hi, thank you, Beverly and Amanda. Good morning. My name is Nancy Sloat. I'm the Older Adults Program Manager for the Seattle Public Library, and we wanted to welcome you all to this third program in our Ducks in a Row series. We're also delighted to be partnering with People's Memorial Association to be able to offer really great information on end-of-life planning and considerations. If you're just tuning in for the first time, for the first program, our two previous programs, estate planning and advanced health directives, have been recorded and are available on the People's Memorial Association website. I just wanted to give a very quick update for those of you who are Seattle Public Library patrons and have been anxiously waiting for your holds and books to come in. Our curbside pickup is back to normal this week. We had so many disruptions last week because of the smoke. We have 7 branches where you can pick up your holds on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. And I will put in the chat box the website where you can get more information about the curbside pickup. And then I just wanted to let you know that we have some other programs coming up in our older adults programming. We have a calendar where you can find all of those programs easily, and I will put that in the chat as well. October 3rd, we have Medicare prescription drug coverage coming up. You know, the open enrollment period for Medicare is starting in October, so this is a great time if you want to change your coverage. And we have in September and then through December, we are having creative arts programming with Silver Kite, community arts, great hands-on interactive arts programming, writing, visual arts, all kinds of different programs. So please check those out. So right now I want to turn this back over to Amanda and Beverly.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nancy. We wanted to go ahead and take a quick second to acknowledge that People's Memorial Association's office is located here in Seattle, and we want to make sure to note that our office physically and a large portion of the service area here in Washington is located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish, Duwamish, and Suquamish nations, and we work and live on those lands, and so the least we can do is acknowledge that. Oh, and that's just our logo, just to remind you who we are. We'll talk a little bit about kind of the work that People's Memorial Association does. If you're new to the organization and you've joined us through the public libraries, we're really happy to have you over and learning about funeral options today. We have a couple of housekeeping issues that we just want to bring to your attention before we get started. We have muted everyone. It's just a little bit easier for us all to stay focused when we can't hear each other doing the dishes and playing with the dog. If you do, just turn away for a second and you miss something important, no worries. We are recording today's presentation and we'll make it available on our website. We're building up a webinar library right now, so we're hopefully going to have a nice, really robust selection of materials on there for you to share around with friends and family. And, if any questions come up during the course of the presentation, we're happy to go ahead and try and hammer through as many of those as we can. That's what we're here for. Feel free to drop those in the chat box, or you can use the Q&A feature. If you'd like us to keep your identity anonymous when you ask, no worries. You can definitely send a chat to either myself or Amanda directly, and we'll make sure to obscure your name. Yeah, because we just want you guys to get all the information that you can to make the most informed decisions possible. And so here's that bit I promised you about People's Memorial. So in case you didn't know, we are the oldest and largest memorial society in the United States. We were founded in 1939 right here in Seattle, so we had a big to-do this past year to celebrate our 80th anniversary. We are currently the only nonprofit in Washington that's providing funeral education and advocacy. We are an affiliate of the National Funeral Consumers Alliance. There's about want to say 72 or 73 other similar organizations scattered around the United States. So here at People's Memorial, we specifically serve the state of Washington, but if you are joining us from out of state, there's a distinct possibility there's another organization nearby that can help provide similar services to what we're doing here in Washington and help you get connected up to resources that are a bit more local to where you are. And we just want to brag a little. I think it's actually about 214,000 folks have joined our association over the 81 years we've been working here in Seattle. And about 70,000 of those folks are actually still alive. So we serve a pretty robust community. And when we say we serve that community, what we do, education is a huge piece of what we do. We love to offer courses like this. The shift to webinars was a little bit tricky at first, but we're actually really excited to expand the breadth of material we can offer and the just variety of folks we're able to serve. We're seeing much more folks joining us in a web-based format than in classrooms, and we're able to reach people a lot further away, which is a pretty exciting development for us. So we have these free classes. We also host a whole lot of resources on our website and our different social media platforms. So we'll make sure that you have links to all of those things if you do want to try and keep up to date on what all's going on. We'd love to share what we know with you. And we're pretty enthusiastic about advocacy around here. We do some state level legislative lobbying. One of the more recent victories we're pretty proud of here is, I believe it was State Bill 5001 that got passed this previous year that increased the options for disposition for your remains here in Washington. And Amanda's going to touch on what some of those developments are, but the increase in options and transparency in the funeral industry are huge passions of ours, and we work really hard to make sure that families have the information that they need to make the informed decisions that are going to meet their cultural needs and their financial resources as well. So we're hoping to make sure we also do talk about, the ways that we are working to protect cultural practices. There's a whole just beautiful diversity of folks here in Washington, and we want to make sure each of those families is able to care for the dead and grieve their loss in the way that's most appropriate to them. And a big piece of all of that is making sure that families aren't going into unnecessary debt when they're trying to just do right by someone they loved. So that access to affordable cremation and burial is just the bottom line, most essential piece. So if you're curious to learn a little bit more about that, we'll make sure that you get a link over to our website to take a look around. We're trying to keep it updated constantly, so there's always something new on there for you. So thank you so much for joining us today. It looks like we've got almost 50 people today, which is a pretty good turnout, not too shabby. Welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us. I'm gonna go ahead and turn this over to Amanda Stock. She's our Membership and Development Director here at People's Memorial Association. Oh, there's the fancy slide for Amanda. I love it, that's very official.
Thank you, Beverly.
No problem.
All right, I'm going to start sharing my screen. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm glad that if you're here in the Seattle area that we're breathing a little bit cleaner air. I know that I've been enjoying being able to get back outside and go on walks. So thank you for joining us today. If you heard before we got started, I was sharing one of my favorite songs by Led Zeppelin, Stairway to Heaven. It just evokes really great memories of my childhood, playing outside in the driveway while my dad worked in the garage and my mom was helping him or maybe sitting on the lawn reading a book. It was summertime. So music has a great way of evoking some really wonderful memories for us. And we're here to talk about funeral arrangements and death care. But really, to me, talking about death is talking about how I want to live. And that means bringing up great memories, putting myself in a great headspace where I feel good and I feel loved. So if you are so willing, I invite you to use the chat box to share your favorite song. And if you're up for it, you can even share when it could bring you comfort at the end of life. If you're not comfortable sharing, just think about that. How can music help you maybe feel comfortable in your final days? So in today's presentation, we will be together for just about an hour. Depending on the number of questions, we might go a little bit over. I will be sharing with you the role of the funeral home, legal issues to consider when making funeral arrangements, disposition options, or by the term disposition, we mean what is done with the body after death, and the costs, who is responsible for those costs. Prepayment options, if that's something you want to consider. And then finally, some documents to help you get your plan down in writing. People's Memorial does offer free legal documents so you can get your final arrangements down in writing. So we will be sure to share those with you so you can access them. All right, so let's jump into it. The role of the funeral home. It's most important to know that the funeral director works for you. And you are starting the most important step, which is doing a little bit of research ahead of time. Taking a few hours before death is imminent can help you and your family save a lot of money and save a lot of stress. And it's really important to know that you have choice when it comes to selecting a funeral home. You don't have to go with the one that is closest to you. You don't have to go with the one that the family has been using for generations. So it's really important to know that you should select, or you can select, a funeral home that offers what you want at a price within your budget. The funeral home is responsible for handling the body. So that is from place of death, whether it be at home or in a hospital setting, holding the body while paperwork and legalities are taken care of until cremation, aquamation, or burial occurs. The funeral home also handles paperwork and delivers death certificates. Here at PMA, we often hear folks say, well, I don't want to use a funeral home, and that is definitely an option, but I think the word funeral is a loaded word. Often folks are maybe intending to say, I don't want a memorial service or this big hoopla that involves the church and graveside service and all of these things. I just want something simple. But even if you do go that route, you might still be interested in using a funeral home because of the work that they do with the body and the paperwork. But like I said, you don't have to use a funeral home. So if that is your choice, then a home funeral would be an option. The funeral home is either not involved at all or minimally involved. They can maybe just handle the paperwork. In this situation, your loved ones prepare your body after death. So they wash the body, they dress the body in the final clothing. The body typically lays in state for a home wake for about 3 days for loved ones to come and pay their respects, play music, read stories, things like that. That typically happens for a maximum of 3 days. And then the family can then transport in their own vehicle the body either to the crematory or to the cemetery or whichever care facility, depending on what's being done with the body. So if this is something that's of interest to you, the most important piece is that you have a conversation with your family about it, because they will obviously be the ones that will take on these responsibilities. So I mentioned earlier, you do have the power to shop around for a funeral home. Some things to consider. There is a federal law called the Funeral Rule that requires funeral homes to share their general price list, which is simply a printed sheet of paper that shares all of their prices. They are required to share that with you once you step foot on their premises. We are currently trying to update the funeral rule. It hasn't really been amended since it was first written in 1984. And obviously a lot of things have changed since then. We shop online now. No longer gone are the days that we go into a store to figure out a fair price for something and shop around for a good price. So we are working to require that funeral homes post their general price list on their websites if they have one. So stay tuned for that update. The funeral home also legally must give you a quote over the phone. The caveat here is that you must ask specifically for what you need. So you can't simply say, what's your price for cremation? You have to say, what is your price for cremation, including transportation, filing the death certificate and other paperwork. This is where the body is located. So here are the number of miles in between the funeral home and the place of death. When you ask specifically for those line items, they must legally give you the price, the cost. Some general price lists, we are now seeing them on websites. We're seeing in Washington State about 38% of funeral homes host their price lists on their website. It slowly is increasing year after year. Here at People's Memorial, we conduct a funeral home price survey. We recently did one in 2018, and we're currently working on the 2020 version. And that involves us reaching out to the funeral homes in Washington State. I believe our case limit is if they handle 2 cases per month. And we gather their price lists and we put together in a spreadsheet the cost of cremation, the cost of burial, so that you can search by your city and figure out what the funeral homes in your area charge for cremation, so you can easily compare prices. So some legal issues: who can make your funeral arrangements on your behalf? First and foremost, your designated agent. So if you're familiar with creating a living will or a financial will, an estate plan, you assign a power of attorney. Well, there's similar powers for funeral arrangements, and it's a very short window of power that this person has. It's right after death. They're able to work with the funeral home, authorize your cremation, for example, speak with the funeral directors, that sort of thing. Just as with any other power of attorney, you can choose this person. You don't have to choose your spouse or your eldest child. It's important to know that if you don't designate your agent, the state will. We do have a law about next of kin, and it follows in this order: surviving spouse, majority of children, surviving parents, and so on. For a majority of children, if you have 3 children, 2 out of the 3 of them must agree on what is to be done with your body. They also must sign off on paperwork. So for some people, they find it easier just to designate one of their children, so that both of them, maybe they live across the country, then both of them don't have to sign off on paperwork. And that final line there, most responsible party, can be a little confusing. Let's say you don't have a next of kin, or maybe you do have next of kin, but you don't necessarily trust that they'll be able or willing to handle your arrangements. Well, then the person who shows up for you and says, I'm willing to step up, even though I haven't been given the legal authority, after a certain period of time, that person who's willing to act on your behalf will be given the authority, so that the person's body isn't considered indigent. So that could become the neighbor or anyone who's willing to step up. So we don't want it to get to that place. It's really it's a 1-page paper to designate an agent, so it doesn't hurt. Why not? So if next of kin cannot agree or fail to claim the body, the deceased may stay in refrigeration at a funeral home for 90 days. After that, the funeral director or the medical examiner gets to make the decision. So you don't want to end up like this guy over here, just sitting around waiting forever for someone to make a decision. The good thing is, if you designate an agent today and a couple months or a couple years later, you decide that's not the person, you can just tear up that piece of paper and choose someone else. Okay, so we've got 5 legal options for disposition, or for what's to be done with our body after death here in Washington State. We have cremation, alkaline hydrolysis, otherwise known as aquamation; burial, there are a few different types of burial; natural organic reduction or recomposition; and full body donation. So I will go through each of these options, and afterwards I will talk about the costs for each of these. Before I do that, I'm noticing some things coming up here in the chat box. Let's see if there are. Does children include stepchildren? You know, I actually don't have the answer for that. I'm going to check with one of our funeral directors to be sure and get back to you about that. That's a great question. Okay, so cremation. I think we're all very familiar with this process. It is fascinating to see that 80% of Washingtonians choose this option, compared to the national average of 53%. Witness cremation is available. And that might be for the family who wants to follow the body to the crematory, be there, have maybe a little ceremony before the cremation occurs, maybe even go as far as pushing the button to start the retort, which is what the machine is. Some people really need to be hands-on like that so they can start the grieving process. After the cremation occurs, it takes about 4 to 6 hours. The result is bones that are then processed and ashes are returned to the family in an urn. A lot of things can be done with ashes besides just the urn. Some keepsake items like jewelry, or up here on the right-hand corner, I have a picture of a lighted globe glass ball. It's got cremated remains included there in the glass blowing process, and it connects to a little power cable, and it's a lit up orb. This work is done by a company here in Seattle called Artful Ashes. They do angels and a few other different designs as well. And another question that we get often is, what happens to the gold fillings? Are crematories just sitting in piles of gold? Unfortunately, the answer is no. And unfortunately, it costs more to extract the gold fillings than to do anything with it. The gold in our teeth is an amalgam, a blend of, so it's not solid gold, and the amalgam is really only worth $25 to $80, but only a dentist can extract the fillings, not the funeral home or the funeral director. And so to pay the dentist to come out and do this service costs anywhere between $650 to $800. Dr. Daniel Bickle with Redmond Art of Dentistry asked quite a few of his colleagues what they would charge for this service, and that was the range that he was getting. So unfortunately, it's not worth it to extract gold fillings. All right, so another option considered water cremation. It's legally known as alkaline hydrolysis. Here at PMA, we're going to call it Aquamation. You might hear a lot of different terms for this option, but it was recently legalized here in Washington State, and it is the reduction of the body using water, alkali, heat, and pressure. And that alkali chemical is a really gentle chemical. We see it in our shaving creams and in our soaps. It's simply sodium hydroxide and potassium hydroxide. And after about 4 to 8 hours, depending on the machine, which I've got an image of it here, the result is processed bone, just in the same way as flame-based cremation. The bone is then pulverized, and then the family is returned the ashes in an urn. And the same things can be done with these ashes. Alkaline hydrolysis is legal in about 20 other states. And I wonder if any of you heard about the passing of this law in May of 2019, where this was a legalized option. So share with me in the chat if you did. And let's see, Beverly, are you seeing any questions yet that might be relevant for me to answer right now?
It doesn't look like just yet. I was just clarifying for some folks in the chat about what the designated agent form is, and
Okay.
kind of what that process is like here in Washington.
Okay.
We do have someone who's a little bit curious actually about the energy used during the cremation process versus aquamation. You want to say
Yes.
something?
Yes, that's on my next slide. Before I jump ahead, I'll just show you an image. On the left here, we have cremated remains, and on the right, we have aquamated remains. So the aquamated remains are just a little bit lighter in color and finer in consistency. So aquamation was something that Washingtonians wanted to see as an available option here because it is more environmentally friendly. We see a more than 75% reduction of a carbon footprint compared to flame-based cremation. And it also uses 1/10 of the energy of flame-based cremation. There's no burning of fossil fuels. So this process was just legalized in May of 2019, and then then the rules and regulations were written. Our government officials took a year to do that. And then because of COVID, the aquamation machines were being held up at the borders because a licensed machinist has to travel with it. So just last week or the week before, the machines made it here to Washington. So we aren't sure yet about which funeral homes will be offering this service. We are working on gathering a list, and we'll have that up on our website in time. Until then, if this is something you're interested in, I recommend you contact funeral homes in your area to see if they'll be offering this service and what they'll be charging for it. It will also show funeral homes that this is something that the community wants to see. I do know for certain that the co-op funeral home of People's Memorial, that's our member-owned funeral home that services King County, is offering Aquamation. So there's an option there at least. If you are interested in some of the eco-friendly options for death care, I encourage you to attend our Green Funerals Week coming up in October. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few other slides. So scattering ashes, whether they are cremated or aquamated remains, you can do so on private land with the permission of a landowner, on national or state parks with the permission of the park ranger. Scattering is also allowed on all navigable waterways, so any river, the Puget Sound is fine, but not in a lake like Green Lake or something like that. And also the Washington State ferries allow you to take a biodegradable container, and they will slow the ship down and allow you to drop the container over into the ocean. And it's actually a really beautiful ceremony. We were able to participate in that here at PMA last year, and they'll slow the boat down. They will make an announcement so the other guests on the ferry know what's going on, and they will toot the horn. So you just have to arrange it in advance. And biodegradable urns are becoming more popular. I just searched on Etsy and I found this beautiful flower urn on the left. There's simple kind of box-shaped urns. They're in the middle, they're paper. And then there's even some more extravagant ones. There's one here shaped like a shell. Do you have, yeah, Beverly?
Oh yeah, I was just thinking, since you were talking about scattering, we did have a couple of folks with some more questions about ashes.
Okay.
It looks like we do have someone who's curious about what kind of energy is used during the process of cremation versus what's used to complete an aquamation.
Okay, you know, I don't have the answer to that. I do know that in our Green Funerals Week, we will be talking about the environmental impacts of cremation.
Yay.
Beverly will be our host for that class. So if you want to know a little bit more about the science and the fossil fuels that are burned and the energy that's used, I recommend you join us for that one. Otherwise, I will put together a quick blurb in our follow-up email and answer that question for you.
Okay. And someone's kind of curious, speaking of the energy output and the difference between those processes, are there any concerns about air or water contamination with aquamation, like those byproducts? Are those environmentally safe?
Yeah, so there's no pollutants in the air because nothing is burned. There is a liquid solution that results from aquamation, and that liquid does go into our sewage system. It is processed beforehand, so it does go through our sewer, but it is marked as safe by the EPA. So yeah.
Okay. And then it looks like we have one more question here. Are the ashes that result from a cremation or an aquamation actually pulverized bone?
They are, which I had no clue about before I started working with PMA. So the flesh and muscle is burned away or aquamated away during the process, and the result is bone for both of them, and they are pulverized. And what's fascinating to me is the weight of ashes depends on bone density. So it doesn't matter the size or the weight of a person's body. So a younger person will have a heavier amount or more amount of ash that's returned compared to an older person maybe in their 80s with less bone density.
I didn't realize. Oh.
Yeah, yeah. Great
Okay, that's all I had for you. Get back to what you were saying.
Thanks. Okay, so our next legal option in Washington State is full body burial. And Burial is only allowed in established cemeteries. So unfortunately, we're not able to bury on our own land without registering it as a cemetery with the state. We've had this question a few times at People's Memorial, and so I'm really proud to say that we're able to answer it confidently now. We did have a family who buried their father on his land. That was his wish. And then they were contacting us for a death certificate, wondering how the funeral home could help there. And they found themselves in a pickle. So in order to register your private property as a cemetery with the state, you must deposit money into an endowment care fund. Does anyone want to take a guess at how much has to be deposited in that fund? Well, spoiler alert. So you've got to deposit $25,000 in the endowment fund in order to designate your property as a cemetery. So it's very expensive. It's important to know that embalming is not required by state law. And that's for all of the states in our country. And national cemeteries are free for veterans and their spouse. However, it's very important to know that only the plot at the cemetery is what's taken care of. The preparation, the picking up of the body, the washing, dressing, embalming, if that's your choice, the casket, that is not included. And so there will still be fees for preparing the body. So for burial, we have a few options. We have conventional burial, we have green burial, we have direct burial, or full service burial. Direct burial means there will be no family present, either in a church or other house of worship or at the gravesite. The body is simply prepared for at the care facility, delivered to the cemetery, and placed in the ground with no one present. That's a direct burial. Or we have full service burial, which can include everything. Conventional burial typically involves embalming, a viewing of the casketed body before the casket is shut, a memorial service at a house of worship or church, and typically a graveside service as well. The casket at the cemetery is then placed inside a cement or metal vault or liner. And this liner is used really to support the heavy machinery that's used to maintain the lawn. That's why when we go and visit a cemetery like the one we see here, we're able to walk safely on the lawn to go and visit the graves. And then typically a headstone is used to mark the grave. On the other hand, we have green or natural burial, which involves traditional practices that we've been using for most of human history. For this option, no chemical embalming is used. A biodegradable container is required by that green cemetery. The body is placed directly in the ground with no vault or liner. And typically, again, depending on the cemetery, rocks or native plants are used in lieu of a tall standing marker or some other type of stone that's not native to that land. So if green or natural burial is for you, there are some really great casket and shroud options out there. This option is becoming much more popular, and so lots of companies are responding to the requests of the communities. Here pictured is a wicker casket. So essentially any green casket would be something that's made of biodegradable and sustainable materials. No metals are used for the handles or latches, and non-toxic glues are used. And then on the bottom right, I have an image of a shroud. A shroud will be made out of natural or biodegradable fibers such as cotton or linen. All right, so some cemetery information. One thing we do notice at People's Memorial when we get calls or emails is there can be a lot of confusion about the separation of duties between a funeral home and a cemetery. It can be confusing because most cemeteries have their own on-site funeral home, but it's important to note that you don't have to use the on-site funeral home. Typically, the funeral home that's connected to the cemetery will have a little bit higher prices. However, for some folks, that convenience is worth it. But just know that the law states that any cemetery is legally required to work with any funeral home. So owning a plot means that you have the right to be buried there. It's not owning a piece of that land. Therefore, the cemetery owns the land and they make the rules. So if you want to be buried on their land, essentially you have to abide by their rules. The purchase of a plot does not include all costs. This is another issue that comes up often. Maybe someone has owned a plot for many, many years and the family's really surprised at time of death that they are charged for the opening and closing of the grave. That is the digging of the hole and placing the casket inside. Those fees, unfortunately, we just can't, cemeteries just can't charge ahead of time because it depends on the current market value of what it costs to pay someone to open that grave. Plot prices vary drastically by location, as does buying property. The plot up on the top of the hill under the beautiful tree is going to cost a lot more than the one way down below by the road. And since the cemetery owns the land, they can restrict the use of the plot. What I mean by that is they can restrict the number of burials per plot. So often husband and wife or a whole family might want their urns to be placed in the same plot, but the cemetery can restrict that. So if that's something that you're hoping for, you'll definitely want to check with the cemetery what their restrictions are. They may require that you use a grave vault or a liner because, again, they're maintaining their property. And they also might have requirements on the size and type of monument that's used. We've seen some cemeteries only allow a certain type of stone. And there are 4 different types of cemeteries. There are conventional cemeteries, natural cemeteries, which are green. So we like to say there are different shades of green when it comes to green cemeteries. Natural is kind of like a medium green. They will have restrictions on what kind of caskets you can use. They won't allow vaults or liners. The whole cemetery will be a green cemetery. Conservation is a super green cemetery. Typically in this situation, their main priority is conserving the land, and they've decided that the best way to do that is to make it a cemetery. So in this situation, they will maybe not have graves lined up in a certain way because they will be working around the plants that are growing there. They don't want to disturb any nature. They may not let you place even a stone to mark the grave. They might only allow the planting of a native species there. And then we're seeing a new type of cemetery pop up, which is a hybrid cemetery. So that's a blend between conventional and natural. Fortunately, cemeteries are seeing that people are more interested in green burial, and so they're wanting to offer that option at their conventional cemetery. In this situation, they might even still require a vault. So again, there's a little bit of research that should go into choosing a cemetery, because if green is something that you're leaning towards, you might want to see how green do you want to be? What is it about green burial that's of interest to you? All right, so natural organic reduction is another option that's recently been legalized for us here in Washington State. We are the only state in the nation that is offering, and actually in the world, that's offering this option. Natural organic reduction is the legal term, otherwise known as recomposition or human composting. So this process is a safe and research-proven method of gently transforming the body into soil. The company that has founded this process, called Recompose, did a research project at Washington State University with 6 bodies to ensure that this process does work. So essentially, organic material is placed with the body in an individual vessel. It's the perfect environment for microbes to do their thing naturally, but just to speed up that process. So heat and moisture is built up with the addition of those organic materials, and the body decomposes in just 30 days. Even bones and teeth break down. And at the end of the process, the metal from maybe a hip replacement or shoulder is sifted out. The result is safe and clean soil. So there are no harmful pathogens found in the soil. There's no DNA. So about a cubic yard of soil is produced because of the addition of that organic material. The family gets first choice to take how much or little of the soil that they want. A cubic yard is a lot, so most families might not want to take that much soil. So the company Recompose has built a partnership with a forest restoration group, so the soil will be donated. This process uses 1/8 of energy compared to cremation and saves over a metric ton of CO2 per person. So in the chat box, let me know, did you hear about the passage of this law in Washington State back in May of 2019? Both recomposition and aquamation were passed at the same time. I'm seeing some yeses, maybe a yes with a question mark. An exciting development. We are very fortunate to have this in Washington State, absolutely. And another thing too, I know it's part of Recompose's business plan to support other states in legalizing this option. So here's a photo, an artist rendering of what the Recompose facility will look like. They had to pivot their business plan a little bit because of COVID. So they will be opening in November of 2020. It won't be the full suite of services that they were originally hoping. They wanted it to be a community center and things like that, but they're at least opening their doors in November, and we just are really excited to continue following their progress. So if you want to follow as well, visit their website at recompose.life for more information. Yes, Beverly, questions?
Just a couple. Just some little stuff like what happens to the metal in our bodies? Is it recuperated? Can the family have it back?
I believe that the family will get the choice to have it back. Even when we do flame-based cremation or aquamation, the family can request from the funeral home to receive those parts back. So I imagine that Recompose will offer the same thing. But it will be sifted out of the soil at the end of the process, so there's no surgery or incisions that need to be made on the decedent before the process happens.
Okay. So this process takes about 30 days. Where does that process happen? Can you visit while it's going on?
Yes. So here's an artist rendering of what the facility will look like. So you'll notice the body has been shrouded and placed in a bed of wood chips, and it will go into this like beehive type wall of individual vessels, and that's where the recomposition will take place. I know that the vessel rotates slowly and things like that. So eventually families will be able to come to the facility. It'll have greenery inside, artwork shown, things like that. Because they had to pivot due to COVID, I'm not exactly sure if that's still part of their November release or if that will be coming later. But again, if you're interested in learning more about this, Anna with Recompose will be presenting for us as part of our Green Funerals Week between October 19th and 24th. So I highly recommend checking out her presentation because she will be doing a much deeper dive than what I just did into this process.
Wonderful. I think that was all the recomposition questions.
Okay, great.
Carry on.
Okay, and the fifth option is a full body donation, but I thought I'd throw in organ and tissue donation here as well. So if this is something that's of interest to you, the most important thing is to have a discussion with your family about what it is that you want to donate and why. Because regardless if you have it on your paperwork, your family has to authorize with the donation program the release of your body or your organs. So they have to be on board in order for this to happen. If you choose to donate either your full body or any organ or tissue, you must register with the donation program ahead of time. And you can look into mortuary schools, medical schools, or there's even for-profit body donation programs. There are specific guidelines of what they can accept, and they will require that you share with them your backup plan because we've seen there's a variety of reasons of why they maybe can't accept your body at time of death, and they just don't know until death occurs. For example, someone died on Christmas Day and they just didn't have anyone to pick up the body that day. So the body was not able to be donated and had to go on to the backup plan. Or another example was the UW mortuary school was full. They had enough bodies that they needed for that semester, so they were no longer accepting any more bodies. So there's a whole slew of reasons, so you always need to have a backup plan. The organization of your choosing is then notified by your family at time of death. And when it comes to and then if it's full body donation, that UW, for example, will come and pick up the body. If it's organ or tissue donation, they will pick up the body, retrieve the organs or tissues that are being donated. After recovery, the family is notified, and the family then calls the funeral home, and the funeral home goes to pick up the body. Typically, after organ or tissue recovery happens, the body is cremated. It just depends on what's been recovered. All right, so now let's get into how much each of these options cost. I don't have a line item for organ, tissue, or body donation because you should never pay for that. If there is a fee for something like that, run the other way. That's not a program that you want to be working with. So where did I get these prices? Again, from the PMA Funeral Home Price Survey that we conducted in 2018. Again, stay tuned because the 2020 version should be out by the end of the year. So cremation prices in Washington State, not including memorial services, prices vary by a whopping 750%. That is huge. There is no other industry where prices vary that much. So one funeral home can be charging about $500 and the one across the street could be charging over $4,000 just because they can. There's no regulation on what funeral homes can charge for services. So again, it just shows how important it is for us to take a little bit of time to do some research and choose the right funeral home. Again, ask about hidden fees. If you're making phone calls, how much does transportation cost? Does that also include filing the paperwork? We are a little bit leery about seeing that low price of $490. We don't believe that a cremation can be done for that price. So in that situation, there will definitely be $100 here and there for paperwork, for transportation, and then all of a sudden the cost is up to $1,200 or something like that. So Aquamation or water cremation, again, not including memorial services, we anticipate will be about $1,500. Again, because the process is so new and the machines were literally just delivered last week, we're not sure what funeral homes will be charging. We do know that the co-op funeral home that services King County will be charging between $1,250 and $1,500. Visit their website for information about why there's a range there. Burial. So not including the cost of a plot or additional services. And by additional services, I mean flowers, music, officiant, food. Those prices vary so much. So direct burial, direct burial prices vary by 400%. So not as much as the variance that we see in cremation, but still huge. Direct burial can range from $700 to $4,800. And that price includes a basic casket, transportation from place of death to the funeral home after the body is prepared, from funeral home to the cemetery, and no services. Remember, direct burial is no family is there, not even at the gravesite. On the other end of that spectrum is full service burial, which includes embalming, viewing, basic casket, services, and transportation. That can range from anywhere between $3,800 to $8,800. And then plots is where it can get very expensive. They range from $1,500 to tens of thousands. There's a plot that we heard of that costs $1.5 million. So just like buying property. And then recomposition, or the natural organic reduction offered by Recompose, is $5,500. Just in August, they launched their prepayment program called Precompose. For as little as $25 a month, I believe, you can start paying towards that $5,500. So again, if this is something you're interested in, check out their website. All right, so who is responsible for these costs? Your next of kin or your designated agent. Often the estate of the deceased is believed to pay for funeral arrangements. However, it's important to know that your loved ones or your designated agent will be responsible for paying the $1,000 for your cremation up front. And then a few months later, after the estate has been processed, they will receive reimbursement. So if you're planning on this option, definitely make sure your designated agent is aware of that, but also make sure that they have the funds to take care of it up front to then later be reimbursed with. If there are no funds, each county has an indigent cremation program. There will be a small fee, I think $400, I believe it is, at least in King County, for the indigent cremation to occur. If the family can't come up with the $400, then they don't receive the cremated remains back. And then People's Memorial recognizes that cremation is expensive and it can also often be a sudden, unexpected expense. So we do have a cremation assistance fund. We help about 15 families a year with the price of cremation. So if you know someone who's in need, or it might be something you're interested in, just visit our website for more info on that. Yes, Beverly?
Got a couple questions about prices.
Okay.
So let's say that an autopsy is required by a medical examiner after someone passes.
Oops.
Are there financial costs that the family should expect to pay?
I believe there's not. Do you have the answer to that one? These are tough questions I don't have the answer to. I'm sorry. Oops. I think that her Wi-Fi is giving her a hard time. So I'm going to move forward, and when she comes back, we will hear about other questions. So prepayment, you might be wondering, should I start prepaying for this? It is an option, but it's not required. Prepayment means trusting someone else to properly manage your money. Most funeral homes no longer guarantee inflation protection, otherwise known as locking in the price. If you expect to spend down for Medicaid, then irrevocable prepayment is advisable. And that term irrevocable essentially means that there's no option available for you to cancel or cancel the contract that you have with a funeral home or an insurance company for its cash value. So it's excluded as being considered an asset. Oh, welcome back, Beverly.
Oh, thanks. I thought I'd take a little break.
Yeah. So
like the wind changed, I lost the Wi-Fi. I had a couple of questions.
Oh, yeah. That's okay. Do you know the answer to the one about the autopsy?
Yes. So it depends on the circumstances surrounding the death, whether or not an autopsy would be required. It's been my experience so far in the couple of years that I've been with PMA that it's kind of a rarity to be required to have one. More often than not, families will want one for their own reasons. And so seeking out a doctor to perform an autopsy can be very expensive. I'm not sure about the cost from the medical examiner's office here in King County, but we can certainly look into that and make sure we share it with everyone so they kind of can anticipate that. But as far as I'm aware, there's very few circumstances where you wouldn't be able to decline an autopsy. So if cost is something that you're very concerned about, that would definitely be something to discuss. There are some costs associated if you are wanting, if your loved one has been autopsied and you would like to have a viewing at their service. There are some cosmetic costs associated with some of the repairs necessary to kind of make your loved one a little bit more presentable after that process, because of course it is pretty invasive. So I know there's costs associated with that, but yeah, retaining a private doctor to do an autopsy for you is very expensive. So yeah, but I'll look into the medical examiner's office.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry about that. It looks like we have a couple other folks here who are curious about, let's see. Do you want to say anything about the Neptune Society or other businesses along those lines?
Yeah. So often folks confuse us with the Neptune Society. We are not one and the same. We have very different missions. The Neptune Society essentially advertises that they take care of cremation, and it's a prepayment kind of like an insurance policy sort of setup. They advertise that you can essentially die anywhere, and they will transport your body back to home and perform the cremation. So if you do find yourself traveling often, wanting that extra protection when you're outside of the state, then Neptune Society might be for you. Let me see, I think the last I heard, they charge somewhere around $3,700 for cremation. So they're on the higher end because you are essentially paying for that extra transportation insurance. We consider a fair price for cremation about $1,000. So it just depends on what it is you're looking for in a prepayment policy, and if you find yourself traveling or not. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Let's see. Well, what if folks are curious about some ways to maybe save money with different types of memorial services? Is it possible to do full service minus the embalming and viewing?
Absolutely. Yes. So you can, again, back to my first slide, the funeral home, the funeral director works for you. So you can customize whatever is done with your body the way you want it. And so you can plan it just how you want. I think the most important thing is to have a conversation with your family so that they understand what your wishes are as well. And they can make those decisions on your behalf when you're no longer here. And so that they can also avoid finding themselves in financial in debt undue for no reason. So you might not be able to cover every single line item, but having a discussion with your loved one about what you want, that you want it to be affordable, you want them to have a good food or something, spend the money on food and not on these other things. So yes, you can absolutely pick and choose what it is that you want for your body after death. Mm-hmm.
That's wonderful. What about disposing of ashes? Are there costs associated with having someone do a scattering for you, like on the Washington State ferries into the ocean?
Yes, so the co-op funeral home offers that service. They charge a flat fee of $150. So if you are paying a funeral home to do that service, then there will be a fee. However, if you've just got a friend who has a boat and can go out onto the Puget Sound, you don't have to pay the state to go and do that. You don't have to pay a state or a national park to go and do that either. And hopefully someone won't charge you to do it on their private property either. And one thing I didn't say, because you didn't hear it from me, is when it comes to scattering ashes, it's sort of like ask for forgiveness rather than permission. The laws are pretty flexible here in the state. Just don't dump ashes into a lake. We don't want that to happen. But when it comes, if you want to go on a hike or something like that, you'll be okay.
I didn't hear anything.
We won't tell anyone.
We do have a social worker that works with low-income older adults who's on the call right now. And so she says, would you talk a little bit more about that indigent cremation plan? Some folks that she serves don't have any funds or any family with funds.
Yes. So like I said, each county has an indigent cremation program or service. It costs $400 in King County if you want to retrieve the urn after cremation happens. If you don't have the funds, then the county keeps the urn, and once a year they do a community burial. And Beverly and I actually attended a burial either last year or the year prior. It was still a very beautiful, dignified, respectful service. Every name of the name of every person who was buried was read off. There were representatives from every faith that read off names, a handful of names, and gave a prayer from their faith. So it was still a really, really beautiful option. Family could still come and attend and be there. But People's Memorial offers a similar service. We do still, the family still is financially responsible for $250 of the cremation. The way PMA works is we do partner with funeral homes and the funeral homes agree to offer certain prices for the people that we send their way. And so if a family does choose to use the PMA Cremation Assistance Fund, they would have to work with one of our contracted funeral homes. I'd like to send you to our website. It's peoplesmemorial.org. We have a whole page about the Cremation Assistance Fund, and we also have a map and a link to every funeral home that we work with that can handle the cremation for the assistance fund.
Wonderful. All right, I just dropped our website link into the chat. I think that's all the questions we have about finances so far, so I'll go ahead and let you get back to it.
Great, thank you. All right, so again, prepayment is an option, but it's not required. If you decide that prepayment is for you, there are 3 ways you can go about doing that. The first one is my personal favorite. It's a pay on death account, which is essentially a special type of savings account that is offered through most bank institutions. So I like this option the most because you remain in control of your money. You can open it through your banks, Bank of America, Chase, most credit unions also have this option. And it's a special savings account because the funds that are in this account are available right after death for your designated agent to use to pay for your cremation, for example. So they're not getting access to all of your checking and savings accounts. They're only getting access to this one account. Maybe you are paying attention to the cost of cremation year after year, and you are putting a little bit of money, a little more money into it every year to stay up with inflation. Today, you might have $1,000 in this savings account. That way, your designated agent has funds to take care of your cremation, and they don't have to use their own money to pay for your services. This pay on death account or savings account moves with you. So if you move to a new state, you don't have to worry about it. It goes with you because it's a savings account in your name. Of course, if you're with a credit union, that's a little bit different. You'll just need to get it transferred to your new credit union. Another option that we really like here at PMA is a life insurance policy. You can open this kind of policy up through an insurance company. Most funeral homes also offer this option. We like this one because it's managed by a third-party credible insurance company. And you may have an option too to have a death benefit that increases to keep up with inflation. So as the cost of cremation increases year after year, so does that life insurance, the value of that life insurance policy. And again, we like this one because it moves with you. You don't have to worry about transferring policies if you move to a new state. And then the third option is the funeral trust account. This is sort of the way we used to do things, but this one can be kind of difficult because it doesn't move with you. And if a funeral home closes or they sell to another funeral home, then all those policies are transferred and it can get a little bit messy, as you can imagine. This funeral trust account is specific to one funeral home location or chain. So if you decide to work with a different funeral home in the future, there's all this paperwork that has to happen. So it's an option, but not the easiest. Okay, so now we've talked about what your options are. We've talked about the role of the funeral home. We've talked about the costs for all of these things, about prepayment to determine if that's for you. So it's now time for you to really think about what you want to be done with your body after death. Talk about it with your loved ones and then put it in writing. So especially if that discussion piece is really important, especially if you are thinking you want one of these new processes like human composting. It can be jarring for someone who's not into this kind of thing or who hasn't been paying attention to what's going on with the new legalization of this option, or it might just kind of freak them out. So have a conversation with them about why it's important to you, why you want this, so that they can understand and they can feel comfortable in ensuring that your wishes are met. A big topic is a funeral or memorial service. We are noticing that a lot of people are shying away from this and they're telling their family, I don't want any service, keep it simple, just cremate me and just be done with it. And what I think we hear, what I think I'm hearing when someone says that is, I don't want you to go through all this trouble. I don't want to be a burden. I don't want you to pay a ton of money, be stressed out, planning this event, go into debt. That's really what they mean. So if that's what you mean, then say that, because your loved one might need to have a service to start their own grieving process, but maybe they won't do it because you've told them, no, I don't want anything done, and they want to honor your wishes. So if you're on that track right now, maybe think about what it is about no service that's for you, and try to get to the root of that and explain that to your loved ones, because then that gives them some guidance. Okay, mom didn't want me to spend a ton of money or stress myself out planning in this event, so I'm going to keep it really simple. In light of COVID and staying home and staying healthy, we are seeing virtual ceremonies pop up. PMA just engaged in a partnership with a company called Gathering Us. They take care of planning a funeral all online so that the survivors can focus on grieving and being present for the ceremony rather than messing with technical difficulties and helping someone get on to the computer and making sure everyone has the appropriate link. So gatheringus.com might be something to look into for a virtual ceremony. Once you get things down in writing, where are your papers located? Don't put them in your safety deposit box, because that can't be opened until sometime after your death. So you'll want to make sure your next of kin, your designated agent, maybe the neighbor that you trust, has a copy of your paperwork. And then consider, have you set any funds aside to pay for it? If you have, make sure your loved ones know. There's nothing worse than when we get a call from an adult child who's finally getting around to cleaning out their parents' home and finds paperwork that there was, in fact, $600 sitting at a funeral home for cremation just waiting to be used, but the kids didn't know. So end-of-life planning doesn't do you any good unless your loved ones know what you've planned. And then last but not least, use the disposition authorization and the designated agent form that PMA provides. These are two legal documents. The disposition authorization is where you put your wishes down in writing. So you can say, I want aquamation. I want my aquamated remains to be in this shell biodegradable urn, and I want you to go out on the boat, play my favorite song, and toss the shell over so I can be in the ocean. That's where you would put those wishes. Or you can also say, I don't care, it's up to my family to decide, but you know that I don't want you to spend a ton of money. And then the designated agent form gives a person of your choosing the authority to see out your final wishes. The funeral home will need to see who has legal authority to authorize for aquamation or cremation. So very important legal documents. The designated agent form is 1 page. It's really simple. The disposition authorization is 4 pages in total. So again, just takes a little bit of time to complete these documents. And then another thing that we provide is what we call our DUCS checklist. It is a couple pages long, and it's a tool to help you organize your end-of-life plan. So I realize that funeral arrangements aren't the only piece of an end-of-life plan. We also need to consider our estate plan or our financial issues, and also healthcare issues. So the DUCS checklist helps you gather all that information in one place. Okay, so we just shared quite a bit of information. I'd like to encourage you to take just a few minutes to reflect now on what do you want your dying experience to be like. Like I said at the beginning, I really believe if we think about what our dying experience is to be like, it will help us live a better life. And so if you are considering that, then how will it impact the way that you live? And then who will you share these thoughts with? I mentioned earlier that we are hosting a Green Funerals Week at noon each day between October 19th and the 24th. We will be joining for 45 minutes to hear from different presenters, talk on different topics so that we can consider the environmental impact of our funeral choices. We will have someone talk about green burial and go into much further depth than I did, recomposition, aquamation. Beverly will talk about the environmental impacts of cremation, and then we will even talk about some of these new eco-friendly products like the mushroom suit that we're seeing out on the market today that claim to be eco-friendly. Some of them work, but not all of them work. So Beverly and I will dive into that. And then at the end of the week, we will be having a discussion. So hopefully folks will have attended one, two, maybe all 5 of the discussions that week. And then we can all gather together on Saturday at lunchtime to have a discussion and talk about all of these issues. So if you're someone like me and you're kind of craving that community and talking with someone new, I have a new baby, so I've really been staying home and staying healthy. I'm just kind of craving conversation with new people. This will be a way for us to get together and talk about something that we're all interested in. So with that, I think I'll have Beverly share in the chat box our survey. We've got a few questions to help us do better. And then I also have if I can find the chat box, I also have a link to those documents I was just talking to you about, the disposition authorization and the designated agent form. They're free. You can download them and print them at home. There's the link there. And then here is the survey.
I've actually already dropped the survey in there for you.
Okay, cool. Cool, Beverly did it. All right, it's there twice, so you can't miss it. All right, do we have any other questions, Beverly, before we call it a day?
Well, if we have a little bit of time, I'd say let's give folks an opportunity to drop a couple things in that maybe they didn't hear an answer to.
Yeah.
That would be lovely.
While we wait for that, we will be following up in the next few days with an email. Even to the folks who weren't able to join us today, they'll get a recording of this presentation. You'll get the slides. I know I presented a lot of information and shared some websites there too. So we'll share that. And then for those few questions that I wasn't able to answer, I'm going to do some research and get the answers to you in that email as well.
Awesome. Well, while people are marinating on the last couple questions they have, go ahead and drop those into the chat box. And I'm going to ask Amanda a couple questions that are on my mind.
Okay.
Well, you've been with People's Memorial longer than I have, and I know you've just talked to a million families. And when we answer the phone, sometimes we get the wildest questions. You never know what we're in for. What's something that you wish people would ask you more? Because we talk about everything, but sometimes it's just a little something simple that's so powerful and important. What's something do you think that you wish more people would think to ask?
That's a great question. I wish people. Gosh, I wish people, I don't know if it would be a question for me, but I just wish people would have the conversation of these kinds of conversations with their loved ones. I mean, I think you're a certain kind of person to spend an hour out of your day to attend a presentation on funeral options. And so I hope that you go to your loved ones and say, hey, check out this awesome, you want to hear about this awesome webinar that I just attended, because I think that a lot of us don't feel comfortable talking about death. And I think in doing so, we're missing out on a lot. I think we're missing out on being in charge of what happens to our body at end of life. I think a lot of us live really eco-friendly lives. We are all about body autonomy, but then we kind of totally forget about those values when it comes to death care. And like personally, I never thought about the environmental impacts of cremation or burial, for example. And so I think maybe the question that I wish people ask would be an internal question of like, what is the funeral industry all about and how did we get where we are today? Because it's a unique industry. It has a fascinating history, and what we consider our modern practices today they've only been around for like 100 years. So like I alluded to, green burial has been what we've been doing forever. So yeah, I'd say just looking at the funeral industry more critically and then being comfortable with exploring these ideas with loved ones.
No, that's a great idea.
Mhm.
Yeah, we try to encourage families anytime we're talking to folks in the community to anytime you have a big life change, it's time to really reevaluate those things. When you get married or you have kids or there's a death in your family, that's a great time to like reignite those discussions.
Mhm.
Have you, out of curiosity, you mentioned you just had a baby recently, and I can confirm he's a beautiful meatball. Is there anything that your family has changed? Like after having a baby, did you guys kind of revisit your own plans, or did anything change?
We did, yes. Fortunately, I've been paying attention to our estate planning classes and our advanced directive classes for healthcare. So my husband was a little bit hesitant at first, but I finally got him on my side. But we met with an estate attorney and we put together a living will. It was really difficult to do because we were considering what would happen if both of us died, and then what would happen to our son after that. But we thought about it for quite some time, and then we finally worked with an attorney to get the plan together, had the discussion with my sister and with our parents about what our plan was, so everybody knows and there's no surprises. And then now we can go back to living, and I kind of like rest easy because I don't know if anyone's like me out there, but worrying about things that I worry about things that may never happen. But because I have a plan in place, I know that our son is protected and I don't have to worry about that piece. So yeah, I think these major life moments like marriage or child or death or divorce can should spur us into revisiting plans, and we change. That's the one thing we can count on, is that we change as individuals.
Well, that's true. It can be such a big project to tackle. So I think maybe we're all a little bit sometimes slow on getting those things updated. We have someone in the comments that's curious. Could you recommend any books for people that are looking to maybe initiate these conversations or start this decision-making process? Are there any books about death and dying preparation, even just like an inspiring novel or a memoir that you could recommend? Anything that's spoken to you?
Yes, we have quite a few. I'm going to pull it up here. We have a running list of books, and I know that Nancy from the public library has, I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
I was going to say, maybe Nancy, do you want to answer this question? This is very much your wheelhouse.
Yeah. Well,
But I know you've got some good stuff.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer. We've been putting together, myself and some other librarian colleagues, a number of book lists sort of to support this Ducks in a Row series. Right now we have two lists published on the Seattle Public Library catalog website. We can send those links out to you maybe in the follow-up email. One is a list on fiction relating to grief, and one is nonfiction relating to grief. We are doing another list on caregiving, and we're doing another list on death and dying. So I'm looking at some Being Mortal, definitely be on that list. Yeah. And I'm taking the names down of some other books that people are putting in the chat.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of people really, this book Being Mortal resonated with them. I want to say that's by Atul Gawande. I read it years ago and it was so good. Do you have any personal favorites, Nancy?
I think Being Mortal is actually the book that I turn to a lot as well. Yeah. I think it's become a real classic.
Yeah. It looks like some folks suggested Die Wise by Stephen Jenkinson. Someone else said Grave Matters. Do you have a favorite, Amanda? Yeah. I know we both are like hugely into, oh my gosh, what's her name? Jessica Mitford's book.
Yeah, that one's a classic, The American Way of Death by Jessica Mitford. But she actually mentions PMA, People's Memorial, in her book. But my personal favorite that I think was most eye-opening, especially when I first started with PMA and started on this journey, it was a whole new topic to me, was by Lucinda Herring. She's here from Washington. Is she from Whidbey Island or San Juan Islands? And her book is called Reimagining Death: Stories and Practical Wisdom for Home Funerals and Green Burials. And she talks a lot about the funeral industry and its history and how we've gotten to where we are today. And it was so eye-opening. I think the whole time I was like, what? Or I tapped my husband in bed, listen to this. I got to read you this paragraph. So I loved that one. Yeah.
Oh, it's so beautiful. I started it a couple of weeks ago, and I don't know where I put it in here somewhere, but the writing is so beautiful. I was not expecting that.
Yeah,
Oh, it's just a little bit of everything.
yeah.
Oh, oh, okay. Well, back to the subject at hand. We do have some folks who have some more questions for how to sort out all that paperwork.
Okay.
Our friend on here that's a social worker says if their patients have a power of attorney healthcare document, do they also need the designated agent form?
Yes, and the power of attorney and the designated agent can be the same person. But the advanced directive, the power of attorney for healthcare, is for everything while the person is living. And then once death occurs, that power, whether it's your power of attorney for finances or for healthcare, ends. And if that person is not considered your legal next of kin by the state, your living spouse or the majority of your children, for example, then they won't have the power to make your funeral arrangements. Like I said, the designated agent form is really simple. It's probably one of the most easiest to complete. It's one
Oh, it's
page.
just a single page, yeah.
So it's kind of a no-brainer to get that one done as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. We do have another follow-up question about indigent cremation. I'm not sure if this is specific to our program or for the county, but could you talk a little bit about what kind of factors are used to determine if a family qualifies?
Yeah, so I'm not exactly sure about the county program, but for People's Memorial, like I said, we budget to support 15 families a year. And with that, I think there's maybe one case that we turn away per year. So we're able to really help whoever needs help. We kind of go on the honor system, to be quite honest. There's a simple application. We want some financial information, both about the decedent and about their designated agent or whomever it is that's willing to be the responsible party. So we want to know about the assets that are owned by both. We want to know what kind of job the person had and what kind of income they had. Same thing about the responsible party. We essentially want to know, does this family, is there really a financial need? We also do require a brief letter from a professional or someone outside of the family stating that there is a financial need. And the person also needs to become a member of People's Memorial, and I don't want to talk too much about that. So again, just visit our website. We're at peoplesmemorial.org. I can actually put the direct link for the for the Cremation Financial Assistance Program, because we avoid using that word indigent because it turns out that that's not a very dignified word, but also a lot of the families we support, their loved one wasn't indigent. It's just the family, $1,000 for cremation is a lot, and especially if it's an unexpected death. So we're providing financial assistance. So
Oh, that's a good point to bring up. Since we're thinking about finances, could you speak a little bit about why there's such a price disparity in the cost of aquamation versus recomposition? Is it just to account for that gathering space or the space requirements or the process? What's the story there?
So the price for aquamation, we anticipate will go down a little bit, especially as more folks are offering the service, with just the way things go. So $1,500 starting out now compared to about $1,000 for flame-based cremation. We expect that they'll get a little bit closer in price as time goes on. But as far as the $5,500 for recompose, it's very much part of their mission that their staff are paid a living wage. They are starting a brand new business, paying off capital. They are also offering it's like a full service experience. So transportation is included, the ceremony is included, the family is able to come to the facility. So that's about as much as I can say to it without being on the team and really knowing the ins and outs. Again, I really recommend coming to the presentation by Anna. It's happening, I can get the exact date, during the Green Funerals Week. It's happening on October 22nd. Yeah, so you'll be able to, Anna will go into depth about all of that.
It looks like we have quite a few folks that are pretty amped up about aquamation, which I'm excited for, because all anybody ever wants to talk about is silly recompose.
Yeah.
So what if you are thinking, I'd like to be an organ or tissue donor. Can you still have your remains aquamated after those donations? Are there limitations on what you can do?
Absolutely, you can. So you can kind of consider aquamation. It's the same. The process leading up to it is kind of the same as cremation, and the process after is kind of the same. So what I mean by that is you can still have a service with the body before it's cremated or aquamated, and then at the end of the process, you still are returned an urn of ashes. You can continue on and do services and things like that with the ashes afterwards. But the main difference, besides the environmental factors between flame-based cremation and aquamation, are the aquamation machine cannot handle materials beyond the body. So the body has to be placed in the vessel without clothes or notes or flowers, because those objects won't be aquamated through the process. We can, however, place a person into be cremated with their clothes on, or with notes or their journal or something like that, or a bouquet of flowers. But for the aquamation machine, it will just cut, like even a flower petal will come out of the aquamation machine as a flower petal. So that's the main difference, if I answered that question.
Wonderful. I think we got everybody's questions, but no fear, if you think of a question afterwards, like later in the shower, like all of my questions that come to me, feel free to email us at People's Memorial